Hi, welcome to Ausgrave Royalty. I am Justin. We are back in here continuing our season covering Bolen's Gods and Goddesses. Hope y'all have been liking the series so far. Always leave a comment. Let me know how I'm doing, good or bad. Always check the description. I always have valuable links, or usually have valuable links there. And I have a ton of notes, so let's kick things off. I want to confess a bias here. So lately, for those who have seen the Hermes video, I'd say at this point in my life, I'm very Hermes, going from idea to idea, exploring all of what life has to offer, traveling around the different realms as Hermes did in terms of stand-up comedy, electronic music, YouTube, all that stuff, right? And how I wasn't really like that as a kid. So it's interesting when the archetype, so to speak, that is to say our biological predispositions, come to life when they can be activated. But I've always felt a kinship with Hephaestus. And when I was learning about him as a kid, and even now, he seemed to be the most taken for granted god. And I couldn't figure out why. And there's that meme of all the managers standing around a construction site, and then there's that one guy doing the work, Hephaestus always struck me as that one guy. That's he's doing the hard labor, and everyone's just kind of dicking around, literally, especially when it comes to Greco-Roman mythology. And yet, he gets treated like crap. Aphrodite cheats on him, with Ares. And I'm just how y'all gonna snake my dude like that? He literally makes Zeus's thunderbolts, right? Man. So previously we talked about Ares in terms of gods. Last time, actual time, we talked about Persephone, but the last god we talked about was Ares. And along with Ares, Hephaestus is one of what Bolen calls the rejected sons. And this refers to the fact that Zeus detested them. Zeus rejected Hephaestus and detested Ares. Both gods were also ridiculed or called names by others, and men who are like them are likely to suffer a lack of self-esteem. Both were sons of Hera, a devalued, angry, and impotent mother. As archetypes, their characteristics are not valued by the patriarchy, and hence men who resemble these gods have difficulty being successful. When Hephaestus was rejected and betrayed, he put his feelings into the objects he made, using tools for a creative purpose. So let's unpack a little bit of that. First is that when she says patriarchy, Bolen is writing in the early 80s, early 90s, and probably researching even before that. So what she's calling patriarchy comes from that era, which is a little different than 2023, right? And what the patriarchy really means is I like to recontextualize it as the meta. Gamers will know exactly what I mean. There's a meta for life. It's the mainstream. It's the Joneses. It's the high-value men, right? As the manosphere would call them. They're the high-status, wealthy CEO types that are said to run the world and are maybe toxically masculine and all that, who are responsible for all these things like the gender pay gap and all that stuff. And So Zeus was the epitome of that. Zeus was literally he was ruler of the sky, of really claimed the earth. And if you don't fit in to what Zeus's vision is, then you're rejected. And we already talked about why Ares, because Ares wasn't really a thinker. He was in his body, not really in his mind. And Zeus is all about being like a legacy growing long-term strategist in the vein of Athena. They're, obviously Athena and Zeus being related, of course. But Ares is very like emotional and reactive, not long-term planning. And Zeus hated Ares. And we'll talk about Hephaestus now, but Hephaestus is another one of those who doesn't really get that mainstream success or blessing ever. Bolen says, Hephaestus as god, archetype, and man personifies a deep human urge to make things, to create objects that are functional and beautiful. Rejected and thrown off Mount Olympus, Hephaestus was not appreciated in the lofty realm of Zeus, where power and appearance mattered. That's that high-value man, like alpha image, that is kind of being proliferated. It's really, yeah. I have a video on the manosphere if you're kind of interested on my comments on that. But instead, he worked alone in his forge under the earth. His attributes are similarly devalued in a patriarchy, the meta. And men who resemble this god have difficulties achieving success. So, again, Zeus success, right? We're talking about the plumber or the blue-collar worker who works extremely hard and, frankly, is probably doing well financially, but he just doesn't care about appearances. He cares about his trade. And thus, he's not ever going to get the attention or the prestige as someone in the Zeus realm, like a CEO or whatever. At least that's not the trend, is what I'm saying. It could be possible. But as the god Hephaestus was thrown out of Olympus, so is this archetype an unvalued and rejected one in a culture that values the heroic, the intellect, lofty spiritual values, power, and the ability to adapt to what is expected and to anticipate the next move. This life pattern is the archetype of creative work, work that emerges out of the metaphors in volcanic fire and forge, work that comes from being cast from Olympus and falling to earth, work that redeems and expresses the wounded creator. When this archetype is present, beauty and expressiveness that otherwise would remain buried inside a man can be liberated through work that gives tangible form to these aspects of himself. So key for this archetype. It's the archetype of like being a workaholic, kind of like transferring all your anger and frustration and emotional work, like feelings, and putting them into your work rather than maybe expressing them in other ways, right? Subterranean fire is a metaphor for passionate feelings, intense sexual and erotic fire contained within the body until it is expressed, or rage and anger that is held in and dampened down, or passion for beauty that is stirring and felt in the body. These feelings, which lie beneath the surface in a deeply introverted person, may suddenly and unexpectedly erupt. The Hephaestus archetype predisposes a man not to talk about their feelings. He prefers to go to his personal version of the forge and work in solitude. There he either sublimates his feelings or expresses them through his work. The forge is where he does the work of transforming or translating what he feels deeply into something outside of himself. Unconsummated love, an unobtainable woman, or unrequited love can fuel the fire of the transitioning forge when Hephaestus is the active archetype. The fire of the forge is the unexpressed passion that inspires the creative work. Hephaestus was the only physically marred Olympian, the only imperfect major deity. He was either, depending on the mythology, born with a club foot, which offended Hera, or thrown out by Zeus from Mount Olympus, causing his injury. This is key. His deformity cannot be separated from the emotional wounding caused by his parents. As a result, this is the archetype of the instinct to work and to evolve in order to heal emotional wounds. Hephaestus the craftsman is very much like the wounded healer, whose motivation to heal comes from having been wounded, and whose wound heals as he heals others. Let's talk about Hephaestus and Aphrodite. The Hephaestus archetype is drawn to beauty and love, that which he was denied, yet seeks to have. Deep and passionate feelings in a Hephaestus can be stirred up by a beautiful woman who is like Aphrodite in her intensity and sensuality. She can inspire his work and set his feelings afire. In this process, male-female roles are reversed, for she psychologically impregnates him, fertilizing his creativity from which new work will grow in him. Let's talk about Hephaestus and Athena, uniting creative work and intelligence. The union with Hephaestus and Athena within a man's psyche enables him to know how to bring his work into the world. The Hephaestus archetype's pursuit of Athena may draw a man to mate with a woman who has these qualities. The task of fostering her husband's creative work or finding a way for him to make money at it, by default then fall on her. Cultivating Hephaestus. The only way to cultivate this archetype is to take the time to do it. Withdraw from the company of others and let yourself be absorbed in making something with your hands or doing something that is manual, something that you intuitively know shifts, expresses, transforms something in you that has been pent up in the process of doing it. It's important to stress the value of being absorbed in creative time. And I've had videos about this, such as my video about music and the one about God and the creative process. So be sure and check those out. Looking over my notes here. Let's talk about his psychological difficulties. Most Hephaestus men have had to cope with feeling unacceptable, of failing to fit the stereotype of what he should be like, first as a boy and then as a man. Again, if you don't like the mainstream status stuff, if you're not tapped into all that, if you're not drinking that Kool-Aid, you're going to struggle with self-esteem at some point because you're alienated from your own culture, of which Zeus represents. Emotional crippling, the consequence of rejection. The Hephaestus man is very sensitive to being wounded. If this occurs, he will take long periods of time ruminating and brooding on it. I have this theory that I made up this expression called holy fire, and holy fire traditionally is like, it's a flame that cleanses, not destroys. I mean, just the TLDR, very gross, whatever. And I don't know really where I got that from, a video game or a movie or something I read. I don't know. But I remember more than once in my life, I'd been ruminating about something. And then I had a really great experience, whether I connected with somebody or I got a good Christmas present or whatever. I don't know. Something good happened. And then all of a sudden, what seemed like a big deal that I was distraught about, I couldn't even remember why I was thinking about it. You know, it seems so insignificant. Has that ever happened to you? My point is sometimes you just need a W, as they would say, as the kids would say these days. You need a win. You need some dopamine. That's probably what's happening biologically. When you get a win, it's like, oh, And there's a new rush of self-efficacy, and it's like a holy fire that cleanses the crud and the muck that was slowing your gears down with the rumination and all that. It's just a theory I have, but that's what this all reminded me of. Lack of success in the world. Being tied to the creative arts, it can be hard to stomach rejection from the mainstream. Rage smolders in many Hephaestus men. And again, when we say men, this can also mean women. So women can identify with the godly attributes, and men can identify with the goddess attributes, but via our anima and animus, as the theory goes. Rage smolders in many Hephaestus men who realize in their teens that they will never be anybody, or when he is overlooked by a woman. If he never finds gratifying work, and if his mode of dealing with rage is to contain it, he becomes depressed and bitter. In this, he is unlike Ares and Poseidon, who, under similar circumstances, explode in rage at others. Acting the buffoon, problems of low self-esteem and inadequacy. Because the Hephaestus man has a high chance of being chronically humiliated, he may end up playing the role of the buffoon as a defense mechanism. Perhaps he has learned that if he resists the relentless humiliations, they will become much worse. This way of coping, though, is usually self-destructive. In the manosphere, they call this jester maxing. Sort of. But that's the TLDR of it, jester maxing. Trying to overcome and maximize your sexual market value by developing your sense of humor for that reason specifically. Each incident occurs at the expense of self-respect and the respect of others. Basically, it can sometimes lead to you like just doing dumb stuff for attention, basically. I honestly think I learned about Chris Farley's life and his journey in comedy, and I think he had some of this. Like, he would do a lot of insane stuff. I forgot what the story was. He was in some like lecture hall or something, in like a college. I think he was going to give a talk. I don't know, but he ran into a room and did something dumb, and someone confronted him like, "Why did you do that?" And he's like, he said something to the effect of, "Well, it guarantees their attention. I won't be ignored," or something like that. I don't remember the exact story, but kind of reminded me of that. And I think a lot of comedians may fall into this. Speaking as someone who's done some comedy himself, some stand-up, and I do comedy videos on the channel as well. Every Sunday, have a joke of the week or whatever. Yeah, another related aspect to this is the Mr. Nice Guy persona to get by in public. A mask to hide the intense rage and depression underneath. And that's another psychological difficulty. So ways to grow. Growth for the Hephaestus man begins when he realizes that there was something wrong with the way he was treated. So it means processing your past. Next comes discovering and valuing who he is through what he does and being authentically himself, and growing beyond the Hephaestus archetype to develop other aspects of himself. These last two tasks are what every Hephaestus man needs to do. When a Hephaestus man finds the work he loves, the problem arises of becoming so absorbed in work that he does not develop any other aspects of himself or make space for others. In the last season, when we talked about King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, we talk about the warrior archetype and their shadow inflations, the sadist and the masochist. But one kind of inflation of the warrior, according to Moore and Gillette, is the workaholic, who's just a human doing, not a human being. And Robert L. Moore himself confessed that he was a victim of this, so to speak. He said, whenever I was dealing with something, I would just work more. Hell, if you let me, I would just work 24/7. I wouldn't eat. I wouldn't talk to anybody, That was his way of getting through things. Other potentials in him are kept and locked away. And even if he identifies with positive qualities of other archetypes, it limits him. It's very important to develop the other archetypes, such as Zeus, Apollo, Athena, or Hermes. Zeus, because Zeus is all about being a manager, about overseeing a kingdom and thinking big picture, not just on one particular project, but about where these projects fit into a legacy. Apollo, because Apollo is all about raising your prestige, is about setting long-term goals, being the archer. And it's the academic aspect of the trade, not just maybe working smarter is Apollo, working harder is Hephaestus. Or Athena, the strategist, how to market yourself, how to sell yourself, how to cultivate a network of high-profile people so that more doors open for you, right? You can get that social currency and that clout. Or Hermes, which helps you, again, not necessarily, well, like Hermes is about the communication part. So Athena is about the strategy of the kind of campaign we're going to run so that you can have success. Hermes is more micro than that. It's about how you act, your sense of humor, how you can talk to different kinds of people and all that. These are all things that are going to really help somebody like Hephaestus, who already has the great work ethic, but is still a bit short-sighted. So ultimately, he'll need to find and develop attitudes within himself that support and validate him and what he is doing. And then, as he works at developing his creative talents, the promise in the myth of Hephaestus is that he will overcome adversity, humiliations, and handicaps. Oh yeah, here we go. I definitely wanted to talk about this. Yeah. One of my favorite things I learned from looking at Bolen's material about Hephaestus is that I love the friendship between Hephaestus and Dionysus, who we'll get to. He's the last one we'll talk about on the channel. But let me talk about it first. In relationships with men, the Hephaestus is an outsider and is not motivated by outer demands to conform and live up to other people's standards. He's like a Sigma male. As an outsider, though, the Hephaestus accepts the Dionysian, also an outsider, who is not afraid to show his feelings and appreciates beauty. The more extroverted and expressive Dionysius can articulate, emote, or act out what lies hidden inarticulately in Hephaestus. This complementarity, I butchered that, whatever, provides a common basis for the few deep and lasting friendships that a Hephaestus man may have. I love that. And we'll talk more about this when we get to Dionysus, but it's kind of like how like the farmer and the rock star, not necessarily the farmer, maybe like the painter and the death metal rock star and the like writer, the author, can all get along because they're all kind of outside the mainstream. Like, oh, a painter, go into finance like the big boys, You're not a finance bro, you're a painter? Yuck. Or like the rock star, who are seen in a better light, but they're not like, they're still an outsider ultimately because they're not part of that corporate culture, right? They can immediately get along because they're both artists and they appreciate good work, right? That's the kind of friendship, like Dionysus, the rock star, chaotic, just living all over the place, living for the moment, loving life, has his own challenges that he's repressing. And then Hephaestus, no nonsense, just tunnel vision on making useful and beautiful things. They come together and they have this great friendship symbolically. I just love that. So I want to talk about my reactions to Hephaestus, of which I have many in these last few minutes. And I already told y'all about my bias of kind of seeing him as an underdog and taken for granted. And I kind of saw that in myself through most of my life, So I identified with that. And I definitely am not a Zeus guy. I'm not a bro. I've always lived on the outside, and I talked about this. Forgot which video it was, but it was the fact that, Hermes. I'm a good communicator, and I get along well with everybody, but I'm like a traveler. I get along well with gamers, with athletes, with boxers, with comedians, with writers, with programmers, with managers. There's hardly anybody I don't get along with. And that's a great thing, but it's kind of like, it's almost too good because I don't know where I belong, kind of. There's an identity crisis with that. The man who belongs everywhere belongs nowhere. And I would get jealous or envious of people who are just so comfortable in one domain, and then they just live there. Like they're a sales guy, and that's their life, cultivating their contacts, keeping the churn and getting hot leads and all that. They have a nice microcosm that they have created, and they can live within that. Me, I'm traveling from microcosm to microcosm. And I've struggled a lot with where do I fit in? But that is where I fit in. That is my gift. Where some people's gifts are living in one microcosm, my gift is being the traveler and being able to communicate and make friends with all kinds of people. So here's what I don't recognize in Hephaestus: his tendency to pour himself into work to channel his frustrations. That's not me at all. If I'm bothered or perturbed or I'm ruminating, I can't focus on anything. And I tend to eat. That's my cope. Very, more video games. Sometimes not even that, though. My mind just runs, and it's like a coal pit that just needs more fuel. Just pour it, you got to shovel it in. I'm burning so much ruminating about my problems, I have to write it down. I have to come up with a plan and sort myself out before I can proceed on work. When I sit down to work, and I've talked about this in my videos on my creative process and God and the creative process and music and all that, 90% of when I work is creating the system so that I can work, right? In music, when I'm composing electronic music, it's all about getting things organized, having a template that takes me from zero to finished product as soon as possible. And creating that template and improving it almost usually takes more time than I do I'm involved in actually creating the track, right? So I'm a big systems guy. I think that if you're working really hard, you're doing something inefficiently. And the last thing I want to do is be inefficient when I deign to do work, So that's kind of my attitude. That's my style, for better or worse. I have long periods of laziness and then explosive, super efficient, exceptional output, all condensed. And then I go back to nothing. I have a lot more to say. Sadly, I didn't get to everything. I do identify with the wounded healer who heals himself by healing others. That's part of this channel, right? So I get that as well. Anyway, hope y'all enjoyed the material. Let me know if y'all want more of this. Hope y'all are getting something out of Hephaestus here. And I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye-bye.